The Realms of Conquest book series is about the world's only magical kingdom and their quest for peace. Paperback and ebook available on Amazon.com, or check out the free video book on YouTube. That's REALMIC.
My name is Ron York, and the name of my book is Songs from an Imperfect Life. Songs from an Imperfect Life is a raw, honest confessional of a broken child's desperate need for attention and an account of his journey towards healing the pain that his family never expressed.
Book lovers unite! I'm Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. In each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. On today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with Ronald York, who's going to be reading from his book entitled Songs from an Imperfect Life. This book is actually a follow-up to his previous novel, Kept in the Dark, where he talks about discovering a long-kept family secret, which I won't spoil. I'll let him tell it. But Ron has an incredibly inspiring story overcoming deception and sexual abuse, and we have a very powerful conversation about his experiences. So this episode is not for the faint of heart, but it's very important, and it starts right now.
Chapter 1, Jesus Loves Me, age 7. I have a church bulletin from Miami Central Baptist Church dated September 19, 1952, with my mother's photo on the front. It announces her resignation after 7 years as the church's educational secretary. The reason given for her departure: to assume the position of full-time Christian mother. I was born 3 months later. My dad's arrest for sexually abusing boys within the church-sponsored scout troop followed 2 years after my birth. During that difficult time, both emotionally and financially, my mother took a part-time secretary job at a sister Baptist church in Miami until our home was sold and we were able to move to Tennessee. Our family became members of Nashville's First Baptist Church in 1956. As was our church in Miami, First Baptist is located downtown with a congregation that comes from all areas of the city. The church was 2 blocks from the Christian Life Commission where my mother worked and the downtown shopping district where I spent childhood summers. The church had, and still does have, a large campus made up of several connected buildings. When we joined, it was anchored by the 1886 sanctuary building that was replaced by the time I graduated high school. They did save the Gothic steeple tower as a tie to the past. My parents would often arrive early because of certain responsibilities, such as committee meetings, which would allow me to join other kids freely roaming the hallways. I aimlessly wandered through those buildings from basement to top floor as a child. I can't imagine there was much of anything that I did not explore, either alone or with friends. I remember clearly the wood floors and steps that would creak in the older of the 2 educational buildings. I spent many years climbing those steps to my classrooms or descending to the basement level for the weekly Wednesday night supper. Rows of adjoining rectangular folding tables filled the room, and I was expected to sit with my parents until I was older and could join my classmates. The spookiest part of the church to me as a child was the sanctuary building. It had dark wood floors with deep red carpet and pews with scratchy red velvet cushions. There was something dark and eerie to me about the room that held the choir robes and the narrow hall and steps leading to the baptismal pool. I also remember all too well the men's room just outside of that area. As creepy as some of those places felt to a child, it never deterred any of us from checking them out. One 7th Avenue entrance had a staircase leading to the balcony. The stairs continued up another level to an always locked door. The street entrance on the opposite side of the sanctuary had a door that was occasionally locked and revealed a tiny wooden spiral stairway leading up to the steeple and attic area above the balcony. I would venture to say there were very few kids who did not make that climb at some point. To a child, It was exciting to have so many areas to explore. I never thought about the fact that anyone could come in off the street and be afforded a safe and secure hiding place. Of course, it did not appear that this alarmed anyone. The fact is, perhaps we actually should have been more fearful of some of the church members among us. I was 7 years old when I was first molested at church. This was 3 years after we moved from Miami because my dad had been accused of the same crime. I remember the man who did it because he continued as a member of our church for many years after our encounter. He was probably in his mid-20s at the time and I believe unmarried. It happened in the children's primary department where I attended Sunday school on Sunday mornings and training union on Sunday nights. The area was on the second floor in the older central building of the church. I don't remember anyone else being around, which no doubt allowed him to be comfortable with what he was doing. Although the encounters continued, I never felt afraid. He was nice, showed me attention, and never hurt me. He would undo my trousers, pull them down, and then proceed to touch me. Whether he was nervous or just wanted to keep me calm, I remember that he would keep talking to me. Eventually, he pulled my pants back up, often give me a dime and sometimes a hug. I don't remember feeling in danger, which may be why I did not run or tell anyone. The routine happened several more times, and eventually he would unzip his pants in the process. He never asked me to do anything to him and seemed perfectly content just to caress me. I have tried to remember why it stopped, and I cannot come up with a reason other than maybe he found someone new. The children's primary department was an area of the church that I was not only familiar with, but also made me feel comfortable and safe. As an adult, I can now look back at the 7-year-old me and reflect on the secret I kept from everyone. While I do not remember being warned to keep silent, I imagine that is what happened. Discipline was strict in our home. Punishment from my dad could come by way of a belt or a switch off of a tree. I have to think that if I had been instructed not to tell my parents, I would have obeyed for fear that I would be in trouble for my actions. I now realize that my parents and I lived parallel lives as we perfected the art of keeping secrets. We were actors playing our roles as the perfect suburban family, living day to day somewhere between the lies. But in truth, the child was sexually abused. The father escaped incarceration for the same crime to which he pled guilty, leaving the mother to play her truest role by holding her family together with her steadfast love and her iron will. Unlike me, my parents never had the chance to remove their masks during their lifetimes. They must have felt they always had to keep up appearances lest someone suspect something amiss in their ideal world. For me, my life changed at age 7. My innocence stolen.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
You know, when I'm fortunate enough to speak with individuals who've written books about their just tragic personal experiences, the first thing that always comes to my mind is, how? Like, how do you find the strength to not only write about what happened to you, but also to relive the experience over again as you promote the story?
I never planned on telling my story. I found letters that long after my parents had passed away that told me of the crime that my father had been accused of. Letters that were shared between my parents while he was being held in jail. And after piecing all of that together and realizing the story, I decided it needed to be told. But to tell their story, I needed to tell about the parents that I knew because that was never a part of it. And in telling that, I felt like I had to be honest and say I was abused. So in one of my first meetings with my PR people and agent, I said, do not make me a poster child for the abused. I'm not that. I'm just simply telling a story, my parents' story, and that's it. Once it came out, I was overwhelmed by the number of people that came to me that it meant something to them, that they had their own stories in their life. And some of them that talked to me about it. And I would say, what did your mother say? What did your father say? And there were a couple that said, you're the first person I'm telling. And these are adults that are telling me something that had happened. And at that point, I decided, if telling this story helps others start dialogue, then I can go ahead and tell the embarrassing, tragic things that happened to me as a child. And so I felt like that was what I was supposed to do. And so I did just start writing, but it was also things that I had not thought about in so many years, and things that I had always kept to myself. And but it just was something I had to do. And so I just sat down and started writing.
And that was your first book, The Discovery, that was kept in the dark?
Yes, that was the first book, and I didn't really intend on doing anything beyond that. But I've had opportunities to speak and to reach out to people, and I just felt like I needed to continue the story and tell what happened to me, and just to be able to show people that in spite of everything that happened in my life, I'm still standing. And if it is for me to now come forward and help others, then I'm willing to do that.
What I can't quite wrap my head around is what an emotional roller coaster this entire ordeal must have been for you. Now, I think the circumstances probably would have permanently just devastated anybody else in your shoes, yet you found a way through it. And I think it's fair to say that you're still finding a way through it. Do you think that these books you've written are your way of reconciling or trying to find closure?
I definitely think that it is in some way. When I first discovered the letters and I started reading them, fortunately, they were still in envelopes, and so they had the postmarks. And there were 100 letters exchanged between my parents while my dad was held in jail for 8 weeks. That was their main way of communication. So when I started putting those letters in order, they would each write at least one a day, sometimes 2 letters a day. And I started reading them and the crisscrossing back and forth. And I am reading how my mother is struggling and trying to keep life normal for me, a 2-year-old. But I'm reading these things about me and things that I don't remember, things that just absolutely broke my heart. And I really was in a really bad place there for a while, keeping it all to myself. And one of my closest friends just one day looked at me and said, "What the hell is wrong with you?" And with that, I started telling her what I had found. And at that point, I was able to kind of pull myself out of that story and look at it for what it was, and not be so wrapped up in what was taking place at a time that I was too young to even remember now about that. So it has been kind of a roller coaster. But when I started writing the second book, I actually did ask for some professional help. One, I wanted to talk to someone and ask them about things that to help explain my behavior on things that I did, how I reacted and all. But the fascinating thing to me by writing, when you take that first story, you start with the being abused at 7, and then followed that was this, and then that, and then that, and then another and another. And all of a sudden, when I was able to look at it, I could see this progression, this escalation of what happened to me and then my behavior. And so it has been extremely helpful to me to be able to look back and see all of that, instead of thinking of, oh, there was that time so-and-so happened, or there was that other time, but to be able to see it all in context, in order.
That's very important. A lot of times we're just so involved in our everyday lives, our routines. We're so stuck in our head that we don't really get the opportunity to pull back and see the bigger picture, or even try to analyze why we're doing the things that we're doing. And you certainly have gone through a lot. In fact, you actually call yourself a survivor rather than a victim.
Well, I feel like I have survived, and I just have to think I am still standing. And at this point, I have an incredible life, and I'm surrounded by very supportive friends that love and care for me. And when I was putting this book out, I was very nervous that friends and those that I work with, would look at me differently. But in fact, they have all just been so supportive. And of course, one of them early on, as she's reading one chapter, she calls me and says, "Well, you just became infinitely more interesting." So, so that was nice. But I am blessed to have so many people in my life that support me with what I've been through and encourage me to continue helping others.
And I think what's amazing is that throughout all of the events that we're incurring in the background, your mom tried her best to give you a normal life.
My mother was incredible. We had such a good relationship always. I was much more in sync with her than I ever was with my dad. I look back now and wonder if some of the distance I felt from my father was because of the crime he was accused of, and that he purposely kept some distance from me.
Another thing that struck me was how you mentioned not really being interested in journaling, but then, later on you realized that your poetry and your songs were in fact a form of journaling.
Exactly. And I have intertwined a lot of the lyrics within the stories. And I even decided to go ahead and go back and record some of those. And I have given out a CD with purchases here in Nashville of 8 of the songs that are in the book and all, and just so that you read about the story and then you read the lyrics to a song that was written about this relationship or whatever happened, and then you can hear the song. So
yeah. And I think the beauty of your book is its format. You've interwoven these songs and poetry and pictures into the overarching story. Can you actually talk a little more about that? Because on one hand, I can see the practical need to, of course, provide evidence and backstory. But on the other hand, you've also given the story texture and kind of a three-dimensional effect.
One thing I was so blessed with, my father was actually, I would say, an amateur photographer. And we always had a dark room in our house until the very last house that we lived in. And so with the first book and telling my parents' story, I had all these wonderful photos of them and childhood photos of me. And so I could incorporate them into the story. And then that worked so well that I decided to go ahead and continue with the second book and put the photos in. And it is powerful in the fact when you are reading what happened to a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old and all in these different chapters, and you can look across the page from what you are reading and see the face of this child at that age. That was one thing my editor was just very insistent on. I thought I had done a good job with it, but she wanted more, but was to keep the reader aware of the age, because when you are talking about something that was happening or acting out, that you would think, well, this is a very adult thing that is happening. But when you then put it in context of saying, this happened the summer of when I was in 6th grade, that just changes the whole perspective on what you're reading.
Yeah. And I also think that it changes a dynamic of the book where it goes from reading about a character to reading about a real person.
And sometimes too real. The person that I talked with and asked for professional help, I said, I'm writing this book. And he said, and I'm happy for you to write this book. And I think you should. He said, but don't consider it a book because you're going to censor yourself. Just write. Put down everything in there. And I did. And at the end of it, I went back and looked at, where do I censor? Do I really want to say this? Do I really want to tell this about me or all this? And I ended up not censoring any of it. I left everything in there. I felt like I just had to be totally honest. And so the good and the bad and the very ugly.
Yeah. And in showcasing your own personal issues in the book, you're also addressing a much larger issue pertaining to religion, the church, and sexual abuse. Has your books received any pushback or resistance from people that are within the church or are loyal to the church?
It has been amazing. The first book, the only pushback that reached me were a few people, and some of them more or less peers of my parents, that learned the crime my father was accused of, did not read the book, but made a decision then on what that book was about. And 95% of the people that have read that book go past the crime and see it as the love story between my parents of surviving all of this. With this second book, I was concerned about the church. I'm no longer affiliated with this church, but I, of course, was a childhood member all the way through adulthood, and then led the music in the mission church. And I was there a great deal of my life. And so I was concerned with, once church members know that, would it be something that they would not want to be known, that a child was abused or anything like that? The senior pastor of the church reached out to me, and has on several occasions now, and has been incredibly supportive. He was not at the church. I'm not even sure he was born when this was happening to me, but he is the senior pastor there now. And he has apologized for the church. He has been incredibly supportive, has offered any help in counseling and everything. And they actually have a situation in the church with 3 known sexual offenders that attend, and there are rules and regulations with attending, but he is in a difficult situation that you do not want to necessarily turn someone away that wants to worship, but you also have that fear of having a sexual predator in the church and being protective of its members. So we've had conversations about this. So I've been blown away by the support that he has given me.
What do you hope readers will take away from Songs from an Imperfect Life?
I hope that they will see that the past does not have to define us, that things that happen to us do not have to destroy us. We can take control of those things. We can work through them. We can turn them around and do good and all. And what I have found with people reaching out to me is the most important thing, I think, is to listen. We often in conversations are not listening. We are so busy thinking about how we're going to answer, what we're going to say while someone is talking, so you're not actually listening. And it breaks my heart when there is someone that tells me something that happened to them, especially as a child, and they come forward and they're not believed because of who the person was that abused them, and that they go through that abuse, then they go through the pain of telling someone, and then have the parents say, well, your uncle wouldn't do that, you're mistaken, and not be believed. It just breaks my heart.
Do you have any advice for others who may have experienced sexual abuse or is currently experiencing sexual abuse?
Currently experience sexual abuse, tell someone. It's got to stop. Do not be afraid. I think we're often afraid that we're going to be judged because we let this happen to us. And it is not your fault. It is the person that is abusing you. Those that have been through the abuse in the past, I think the best thing they can do is to talk about it. They may not want to talk with someone that they know, but talk with a professional. Just be able to get those words out, because I did not talk to anybody or tell anyone for most of my life. And I think by doing that, I always felt ashamed. I had such conflictions between religion and sex, but sex started in the church. And so there were these contradictions all through my life, but I never felt I could talk to my parents about it. I certainly never felt I could talk to anyone in church. And as a child, you do not even want to talk to a peer for fear that they will then turn it against you. And so I just think it's so important that if you're holding this in, to find someone that you trust, that you can sit there and talk and they will listen.
Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss?
I think we've pretty much covered everything. I appreciate so much you talking with me, and I'm just grateful for this opportunity to share my story.
Well, I really appreciate you speaking with me and sharing your story with me and our audience. Where can people go to learn more about you?
I do have a website, and it's under J Ronald M York, jronaldmyork.com. And that does have the information about both books. And I do a weekly blog, which started before the first book came out, that was kind of dealing with the book, things that were not in the book and all that. I'm enjoying writing that. The book is available through Amazon and Barnes & Noble online. And so I think that's about it.
Okay. And with that, we're going to wrap up another episode. First, let me start by, again, thanking Ron for speaking with us and for sharing his story today. If you are experiencing some type of abuse, doesn't matter if it's sexual, doesn't matter if it's physical, please let somebody know, okay? Do not keep it to yourself. Do not keep it to yourself. And I'm actually going to have some resources in the show notes for you to connect with. And I also hope you all were listening when Ron mentioned that the past does not have to define you. And I actually remember as a kid reading an X-Men comic book, and Archangel actually mentioned something similar about not being affected by his past. And I actually looked up the quote. Here it is. Archangel said, "Where I'm from affects but does not dictate who I am. And who I am affects but does not dictate where I'm going." That was from X-Men Return to Hellfire, number 29, which was published February 1994. I had to be about 13 years old when I read that. Anywho, if you have any questions or comments for Ron or for me, or you know an author who you think would be a good fit for the show, let me know. Connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook, YouTube, or email me at info@ch1podcast.com. Check out ch1podcast.com, where there you can find previous episodes and hopefully find your next favorite author. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Overcast, basically wherever podcasts can be downloaded. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review, but most importantly, please tell everyone you know about the show. Word of mouth is better than any advertisement that can be purchased. So thank you all once again for keeping tuned every other week, just about, when we release these episodes. And here's a new thing. We have a Patreon page now. Yes, that is correct. If you think this episode is worth $1, we would certainly like to have that dollar. Look for CH1 Podcast on Patreon. All right, that's it for me. You all stay awesome. Till next time.